If I can't keep my head held high enough, I'll just be love and watch the smiles come, bring my spirits up. There's some shit I like to fix, but I still know that I'm blessed.
Welcome back to my coverage of the Kristin Smart trial, heading into Friday, September 2nd, 2022, wrapping up week number 7 in Salinas, California, the Monterey County Courthouse. First on the stand today is Detective Cole. There was an 8:30 start to court today, and as Judge O'Keefe announced, adjournment is expected at noon today. The day started with Detective Cole, like I said, and the court heard an audio recording of a 2021 interview between Detective Cole and Angie, Paul's ex, who we already heard testify. In the recording, Angie can be heard saying, "They redirected me. Oh, you have avocado trees. Let me go over there." And they said, "No, you can't go over there." And they redirected me to go somewhere else in the house. I must admit this testimony seems oddly placed. I feel like I'm missing something. Why are we revisiting this now? It's hard sometimes with context not being able to see gavel to gavel. I'm doing my best. I don't see how it connects to the rest of today's testimony. Best I can tell, for once, Sanger didn't even have any questions for this witness. Misek, though, he did cross-examine, and he asked if Cole knew Angie and Paul were engaged. Whoa, wait, what? Gross. And the answer was yes. And I'm wondering, so what? And man, did she dodge a bullet there. Cole's answer was, he was aware they were dating. The next question from Misek was, he wanted to know if Cole knew they were headed to Susan's for dinner and they were late. The answer was yes. Side note, apparently we are to believe that she was shooed away from Kristin's burial site merely to get going to Susan's quote-unquote dinner party. I wonder if Angie was Paul's only serious girlfriend. Before we get into testimony, I do need to give another trigger warning. Today's testimony, we're going to hear some very, very graphic stuff from another one of Paul's sexual assault victims. And the descriptions get pretty in-depth. I personally feel weird even making this episode, actually. It makes me feel dirty. I hate being immersed in Paul's depravity. But it's all the truth, as told by those who lived it. I'm not going to have as many slides as normal. It's just a lot. And, there's no pictures of her, not even like a blurry one, which is fine. And I'm not going to dig to try to figure out who Sarah Doe is. Let's let her have some privacy here. This was a really rough day for her, as you're going to hear. Rough for a lot of people today. Hope you understand. It's just really heavy. So it's going to be a little different than normal, but I'm going to bring you the facts either way. Graphic and vulgar as they are, and disturbing as all heck. I, as well as many others, are incensed to even think about the minimum 29 women so far reporting being sexually assaulted by Paul. Not all have gone to law enforcement. It's staggering. And each time he quote-unquote got away with it, violating a female, it just emboldened him even more to continue with his perverted behaviors from all accounts. This, in my opinion, is how monsters are made. By the way, I said the word female above and not woman because Paul was 18 at the time he first sexually assaulted another teen. As far as what's on record, she did go to law enforcement. She did go to the hospital. Her and her father were begging law enforcement to do something about it, but as commonly happens in these cases, nothing was done, which makes my blood boil on every level. Since we all know Paul's propensity for forced ball gags and forced anal sex, this testimony is bound to get graphic. We also know about his homemade sexual assault videos found on the hard drive in a folder literally titled, quote-unquote practice. So, if you have a hard time with this, please skip this episode. There's a little bit of testimony at the end that's outside of this scope, but the majority of this episode is going to be rough and sexually descriptive. I just know that people like me do care about the injustice in the U.S. regarding women being victimized. So if you're one of those women, my heart goes out to you, and you can catch up on the next episode. I'm hoping the announcement of a short day today, that it's only going to go to lunch, means this rape victim won't be tortured too much on the stand. Not by simply reliving the trauma, but then having to be grilled by the defense attorney, Robert Sanger, and to even look at Paul's disgusting face. Sarah Doe took the stand and had to expose herself and relive her 2011 rape by Paul Flores. It was spring of 2011, setting the stage for the night, starting at the Crimson Bar in San Pedro, California, where Paul lived at the time. The prosecution showed Sarah pictures of the bar, which she recognized, and explained she went to the bar that night with a female friend. She said the bar was dead, calling it, quote, very empty, end quote. She recalled Paul being there. She identified him in the courtroom, quote, he's right there, wearing a suit and a blue tie, end quote. She was already getting emotional at that point, even having to look at the monster Paul. My heart breaks for her. I'm grateful she's alive to tell her story. I picture her pointing to ID Paul for the court, all dramatic like in the movies. As a matter of fact, this is the first time I've heard Paul being pointed out like that during the trial. I'm sure it's happened, but the vision is vivid for me in this case, with this particular witness especially. At the bar that night, every time Sarah looked up, Paul was staring at her. Knowing what we now know, it's like Paul was hunting like a predator for his next vulnerable victim. It's chilling, and he did this crap often, according to his victims. At one point, Paul approached her that night. He bought her and her female friend drinks. They had a few minutes of, quote, friendly talk, end quote, and, quote, regular conversation at the bar. Sarah also explains it was a random weeknight, and she normally didn't go out weekdays and didn't expect to go out that night. The prosecution asked her, did you ask Paul where he was from? Sarah's answer was yes. And it was just normal bar talk. I thought he kind of had an accent, so I asked, and he said he was from San Pedro. Side note, Paul actually has a speech impediment that includes a stutter at times and some other oddities to his speech. He has a poor vocabulary as well, and even leaves words out of his sentences. If you remember in one of the last episodes, his creepy comment to the reporter from the Stockton Record, that wasn't even a complete sentence when he was speaking to her. I'm not making fun of people with speech impediments, so please don't get me wrong. We've had experience in our own family and childhood friends that had speech impediments, and typically the school has a speech therapy to help correct the speech problem, and the kid will just go to that, a couple times a week or whatever, and work with that speech therapist. What went wrong with Paul, I wonder? This is just my opinion, but I wouldn't be surprised if he never got the help because Reuben and Susan had their head in the sand and were in denial and failed their son again. I mean, a speech impediment doesn't help you go through life lightly. I mean, of course, it really stands out. It's how we communicate. I have no personal knowledge about this. I'm just guessing and assuming and giving my opinion, as you know. Sometimes I like to do that. Sarah did admit she and her friend left their drinks unattended while they were at the bar that night when they went out to smoke. The prosecution went on and asked Sarah if Paul followed her outside. She answered, towards the end of the night, we were outside and my friend motioned and said, he's behind you. I turned around and he was right there. The night started getting fuzzy, she said. She continued, first by pausing to tell the court she was nervous. She explained there was a fight that broke out and that caused her and her friend to be pushed out of the bar. That brought back memories. I digress. The prosecution asked her what she remembered, and Sarah answered, she remembers kind of rushing to her car and the four of us getting in, me, my friend, another friend. We all ran into the car, and Paul did too. Sarah didn't remember how she got her friends home. The prosecution asked what the next thing was that she remembered, and she said, pretty much just being in front of his house. I remember seeing a white car. I recognized the street because I had a friend growing up who lived around there. She remembered the street name was Upland. Sarah said she had 4 to 5 drinks over the 4 hours that night, adding that she has drank 4 to 5 drinks before and after that night, and her memory has never been as foggy as that night that she met Paul at the bar. Paul gave her another drink at his house. She was shocked at Paul's cluttered house, even referring to it as hoarding. As she walked around Paul's house, she said a lot of things were just piled up everywhere. There was so much stuff in there, she said. Here are some examples of the condition of Paul's home. These were photos presented in court related to the search warrant in San Pedro. And you can see lots of stuff piled around. Like she said, lots of stuff. The prosecution asked Sarah what happened next. She said she remembered going in and out of consciousness, and then we were in his bedroom. I remember him on top of me. She stops and wipes her tears from her face. A few jurors are also using tissues, and this means they believe her, in my opinion. And it's just eerily similar to what the other women said and exactly how they described exactly what he was doing. Sarah said she was screaming. This is so tough, you guys. She said she couldn't breathe. Years after Paul raped her, Sarah attempted to report the rape, but gave up because of her spotty memory. As Sarah continued her testimony, multiple jurors broke down and cried. And I totally get it. Abhorrent isn't even strong enough of a word. We need a new word to describe this monster. Continuing on. The upset jurors prompted another break in testimony. Okay, warning, here we go. Sarah said Paul was, quote, on top of her, and he was penetrating her with his penis. The prosecution asked if that was okay with her, and holding back tears, she said she was more confused. He asked her if she consented, and she answered no through her tears and said, quote, I wasn't really processing what was going on, end quote. She testified that at one point Paul tried to force a ball gag in her mouth, but she was screaming. She described the ball gag as red with straps, and that Paul wasn't giving up trying to shove the red ball in her mouth multiple times as he raped her. She described it this way, quote, he kept shoving it in my mouth. I'm saying no and screaming, but he kept trying to shush me and put it in my mouth. I couldn't breathe, end quote. She graphically described more details explaining Paul was on top of her, pushing her down, and the prosecution asked, quote, do you remember anything happening to your jaw, end quote. Answer, I kept hearing and feeling it crack a lot. I had to pause here. I must say, for me, her detail really lends credibility to her testimony. Side note, it hasn't been entered into evidence yet, but I wonder if a ball gag was taken into evidence. Sarah went on to say Paul raped her for a while. She remembers wanting to shower to wake herself up, and beyond that, she only remembers flashes. Once in the shower, she testified Paul came into the shower and raped her more. She said, quote, he was penetrating me. She testified that she thinks Paul gave up on the assault eventually because she was moving around too much. Sarah remembered the room getting brighter and the sun coming up. She started dressing and trying to go to the front door to leave, and the prosecution asked, was anything said? She answered, quote, when I got to the front door, I told him, when someone tells you no, no means no. She obviously had no idea That's not how Paul operates. He just takes it and has for decades. Sarah said Paul looked down. He said, okay. And she added that she thought Paul understood. And then she walked away. The prosecution asked if Paul ever tried to contact her. Sarah said he texted her a day or two later. Then the prosecution asked, what was your response? Her answer was, I think I just said, leave me alone. Question, did you ever see him again? Answer, I would run into him randomly. I ran into him at a bar a couple years later, and he stopped by my work one time. The prosecution asked what she did when she saw Paul at the Crimson Bar again. Sarah said she told her friend that she wanted to leave. Now back to her law enforcement experience and reporting the assault. The prosecution asked Sarah, did you go to law enforcement at the time? Answer, no. I was just confused. A few years later, I went to police and asked how to report a crime. They were asking me questions, and I kept saying, I don't know. I just kind of gave up after a while and never finished the report. She testified that June of 2021, she met with Detective Cole and another SLO Sheriff's Department officer. She was showed a lineup of photos of men. The prosecution showed a lineup of the same photos of men. In court, she ID'd Paul, his white car, and his house. At that time, a juror asked for a break, and I'm happy to hear they listened to the judge's instructions the other day when the juror completely lost it. And along with reading the jurors their admonishment, Judge O'Keefe recommended to jurors to pass a note to the bailiff if they needed a break. This testimony is obviously weighing heavy on many. When break was requested, multiple jurors were seen crying and passing tissues around. This occurred multiple times in court on Friday. Once back on the stand, the prosecution wrapped up their questioning of Sarah before Sanger went into cross-examination. All right, time for Sanger's cross-examination of Sarah, and of course, he dug right into this witness. He challenged Sarah, stating that years later, Sarah saw news that Paul Flores was a person of interest in the Kristin Smart case. And she said yes. He asked if she spoke to law enforcement in September of 2020. She answered, quote, I don't remember the exact month, but that year, yes. Sanger said, so that's 10 years after the incident you described, correct? Answer, yes. She admitted again that she didn't report her rape at the time of the encounter, as Sanger so mildly put it. That's just gross to me. I'm sorry. It's a rape, not an quote-unquote encounter. Now Sanger is going to attempt to drag her reputation through the mud, which is one of the many reasons sexual assault victims often do not report the crime. Sanger asked Sarah if just about every picture on her Facebook throughout 2011 are ones of alcohol or her drinking alcohol. The prosecution objects on relevance, which was overruled. Sarah answered, I had just started going to bars for the first time that year. Sanger shows a picture of Sarah she posted to Facebook on February 7th of 2012. He called her out on the picture showing bruising as a result of some drinking incident she had. The answer, she said, was, with my family members. Sanger said, bruises to your back, right? And Sarah corrected him and said, that's my knee. According to media reports, Sanger was trying to imply that Sarah lied about getting those bruises from Paul, although he didn't seem to make it clear during cross-examination. I guess that was a flop. Haha. Sanger then turned his attention to the podcast. And you know they bring this podcast up all the time. She said she had heard about it, but she never listened to it. She knew other people who had heard it. She admitted to knowing about Kristin's disappearance since she saw it on social media. Sarah said she told her friend about Paul raping her before she heard about the podcast. She said she tried to avoid the podcast. Sanger then asked, so it was more talking to other people about what they'd seen in the media about the case? Answer, no. I don't talk to anyone about the case. Sanger circled back around to continue the shaming of Sarah. Sarah said she was around 22 to 23 years old at the time, and Sanger said, quote, I don't mean to be disrespectful. It was a big part of your life, going and getting drunk, correct? Prosecution objected on relevance, which was overruled, and Sarah answered and said that that was not all that she did. He also asked if that's what she primarily posted on Facebook. The answer was, to my friends, yes. Sanger's cross-examination continued with more questions regarding Sarah's partying, basically, and she said a lot of people my age did that around that time. Sarah said she did not search the net to see what was going on with the case. And that wrapped up cross-examination, and now we're going to have some redirect by Prevail. First question they asked Sarah was, when you spoke to LAPD, you told them what Paul Flores did to you that night? Answer, yes. Next question. When you spoke to Detective Cole, you told him what Paul did to you that night? Answer, yes. She was excused at 10:16 a.m. Dang, that seems so much longer than that. That was intense for me. I can't imagine what it was like in the actual courtroom. Whew. Glad that's over. I'm sure everyone is grateful that testimony is done, not the least of which is Paul. Reminder, especially for those who aren't following the case, to put this in better context. Here's a brief rundown. During 2020 raid of Paul's San Pedro home, 2 bottles of date rape drugs were found, according to court documents, and homemade rape videos of himself having sex with and sodomizing women as they were in and out of consciousness. LAPD tracked down 2 women from those tapes, and no charges have been filed yet for those crimes, even though both women say Paul drugged and raped them. It is expected that 1 more rape victim is slated to testify in this trial. Sarah was the second one so far. I share this commenter's sentiment, describing how rapists often get away with their crimes, if they're even charged. It's a he said, she said thing, and women don't get the benefit of the doubt from mostly male law enforcement officers. Obviously, Mr. Flores should have been in prison years ago. I hope the jury sees his guilt. And I say amen to that. One of our favorites is back on the stand. Detective J.T. Camp is back, and I've truly lost track of how many times he's been on the stand. He's a regular by now. With the very first question, Sanger was ready on point with his objection. Question was, last year you took photos of the Crimson Bar. Answer, yes. Singer tells the judge that he's going to object to extended discussion of these photos on 352. And you all know this is his go-to. It means many evidentiary rules, but he claims undue consumption of court's time, basically. Prevail looks up at the ceiling. I could be wrong, because I'm not there, but I envision an eye roll. And then it was overruled. Detective Camp goes on to establish that Paul's home was approximately 1.7 miles from the Crimson Bar, and an aerial photo was shown. Next, Prevail publishes a photo of Flores' driver's license from March of 2011, showing his Upland Avenue address in San Pedro, California. And once direct questioning ended, Sanger confirmed with Detective Camp that all the photos of the bar were recent as opposed to back in the day. Detective Camp answered, correct. Sanger had no further questions for J.T. Camp, and Misek had no questions at all for Detective Camp. He was excused at 10:22 a.m. Holy cow, that was so much in only 6 minutes. It's incredible. Judge and attorneys have a 2-minute sidebar in the hallway. When they return, Judge O'Keefe tells the jurors, ladies and gentlemen, I have some hopefully good news for you. We have no further witnesses for today. We're going to be dark Monday and Tuesday, and we remain ahead of schedule. Proceedings will resume Wednesday morning after a pre-scheduled break. The trial was expected to last into October, and Judge O'Keefe said things are running ahead of schedule. Even Chris Lambert tweeted how difficult this week's testimony has been. Thank goodness court is dark till Wednesday. Kristin's family must be depleted and broken. If you pray, please pray for them, and if not, at least send them healing vibes. Give them strength to endure. I also apologize there are 0 videos this week. As proceedings continue, the coverage continues to wane. It's really been depleting where there's not much available as far as videos. All the big ones like Court TV and all that, they just aren't bothering anymore. It's really sad. You know how it is. If they don't get tons of views, they're not going to cover it. You can see here, within 13 hours, I had 60 views, which is not a lot. But compared to Nancy Grace, who's big time, hers was over 24 hours, and she literally had 5 views. And upon further examination, it's really adding insult to injury because she's regurgitating her July 26, 2021 episode. I guess she can't even be bothered to get the latest. I just don't understand it. What the heck? I'm grateful that some of these videos are finally taking traction, and this one from just a few days ago has over 713 views. I'm glad awareness is being spread for Kristin. She deserves so much more. And as always, justice for Kristin.
Can't keep my head held high enough. I'll just speak love and watch the smiles come.
Thanks for watching.
Bring my spirits up.
Don't forget to stop and smell the flowers.
There's some shit I like to fix, but I still know that I'm blessed.